Kia ora koutou. It is lovely to be invited to talk to you about climate anxiety and thoughts on how to navigate it. So I want to start by talking about what emotions are. And psychologists sometimes use this three-part definition to consider an emotion. First of all, it is a feeling. Something is happening in our body. Second, it is an image. Thoughts and visions are going through our minds. And finally, it is an action tendency. So different emotions have the tendency to make us want to do different things. Now, if we look at this picture here, which is people in a positive state, we can see maybe a dad and his daughter. Their bodies are uplifted but relaxed. They've got smiles on their faces. We can imagine they're feeling good in a general sense. And the images going through their minds, perhaps of that park they're in, the sea in the corner, the seagulls, each other. What do they want to do? Well, it looks to me very much like they want to play. They want to get out there and explore. Now, if we think about negative emotions, which is unfortunately, if you like, the focus for today, they, instead of broadening us and making us look outward and want to be creative and take risks and all of that kind of thing, tend to focus us in on an issue. So we have a desire to solve the problem, and if we can, we tackle the problem quickly and directly. So here's somebody who realizes that they haven't studied for their maths test. Their mind is full of the anxiety about this being about to occur. They want to pass the test. So what do? They sit down and study. Great response. However, with chronic problems that can't be solved quickly and directly, we may figure out that the thing to do is to get rid of the emotion itself rather than the problem. Climate change, not easily dispensed of the way a maths test can be. So then we can move into this mode of denial. And if we think about climate change, two of the big emotions, all of which feed in ultimately to climate anxiety, are fear and anger. If we consider that human beings have a flight or fight response to threat, fear is the flight, anger is the fight. So let's look at these two a little bit more. So fear, again, if you can respond really quickly and directly, is great for prompting positive health and safety behaviours. Dodgy spot on your arm, feel fear, go to the doctor, get some kind of diagnosis, you've done the right thing. Again, more difficult with climate-related issues because you can't just take swift action that will deal with the problem. Still, fear has some value. Now, remembering it's a withdrawal, and we saw Sam there in Game of Thrones hiding from White Walkers behind a rock. Thinking of these pictures, which induces the most fear in you? And when you've had a moment to consider that, think about why you chose that picture. Now, for me, personally, I choose the storm surge. Why? Because the house I live in is 7 metres above sea level, and the idea of big seas and sea level rise is really personally threatening to me. And does it make me want to go out there and fight for climate change? No. It inspired me to take the swiftest and the most direct action I can, which is to imagine selling the house and move into higher ground. So fear, in this sense, for me at least, is a withdrawal that ends up potentially being pretty selfish. Of course, what happens in reality is a sort of moment passes and my fear recedes, and we continue to live in a house 7 metres above sea level. So let's talk about anger now. Well, anger is the fight response. So it's the sense that other people have done something wrong and your task is to correct them in some way. Daenerys Targaryen is about to set the city behind her on fire with their dragons, but less extreme reactions, but still pretty powerful, is someone like Greta Thunberg, who you can see there in her bodily response as leaning forward, classic angry pose. Her mind is full of images of all those people that are doing the wrong thing, and what she wants to do is tell them to get their act together. Now, anger is, of course, a big part of social movements, including climate change. Research shows how important it is for motivating collective action. The downside to anger is that it's based on us-them divisions, and it can fuel violent cycles of attack and revenge. Anger destroys, which sometimes we need, but it doesn't build up, which is a pretty important part of tackling climate change. So thinking about anger climbing that way, which image induces the most anger for you? My answer would be the bottom one, because I can imagine the companies responsible for that pollution that's coming out of the pipeways, and the fact that somebody has to walk over that to pass between their home and their work, or to get food, or whatever that person is doing, it just seems wrong. So it's that self-righteous kind of response that we can get with anger. So just to summarize those two: fear, withdrawal, self-protection, paralysis; anger, tearing down and demanding action of others. Now, sadness is the third one I want to talk about a little bit. And sadness, at least the way I'm talking about it here, is a more diffuse, less acute reaction than anger or fear, and in a sense less blaming. It's aligned with things like grief. Something really bad has happened and I wish it hadn't, but it's not necessarily about something that someone did wrong or something that I can solve. Now, interestingly, sadness has been associated with increased contribution to environmental causes. And I've wondered if that's because it has less of that people-based focus that often sort of distracts us sometimes from getting involved in actions ourselves and building up, if you like, the good society. So which image induces the most sadness for you? For me, that would be the polar bear. It's only one left out of my choices. And part of what's interesting about the polar bear, of course, is just the sort of eco-grief that many of us feel about damaging this beautiful planet and the, if you like, innocent creatures within it, but also being able to see the polar bear's face and that empathic reaction that human beings have to the faces of others. Even a polar bear who, if I think about it in an analytical way, isn't really looking like anything, but I find it pretty easy to project a fear and distress onto the bear myself. I want to talk now really specifically about eco-anxiety, which is in many ways a bringing together of sadness, fear, and anger into this chronic state of discomfort about climate change and what it might bring. So the American Psychological Association has defined it as a chronic fear of environmental anxiety, and it's often discussed as a kind of pre-traumatic stress. So we're in an interesting situation where it's difficult to know what particular events can be attributed to, and so for many of us it still feels in the future. Having said that, I think those who live in the North Island here in Aotearoa might be changing a little bit on that, the feeling of the cyclones and the heavy rains, the damage to properties and communities and so on, is making it start to feel like it's very much with us. And of course, many people have suffered some direct trauma through loss as a result of those kinds of events. But still, the human being has an imagination, and even if something bad hasn't happened to us yet, there's that "but it will" sense. So I want to talk a little bit about a study by Hickman and others in 2021 that looked at 10,000 young people from 10 different continents, 1,000 people in each country, so one country in each continent. Australia was there, not us, aged 16 to 25 years, and asked them about their attitudes and feelings around climate change. So this graph shows you the impact on function. So below is how much their feelings about climate change negatively impacted their daily lives. You can see the list there. eating, concentrating, work, school, sleeping, spending time in nature, playing, having fun, and relationships. That's those sort of mauve bars. And then these bars underneath are how worried they are. So the red and orange are people that are worried, extremely and moderately, extremely or very. Yellows moderately through to not worried. And you can see pretty high levels of worry overall. But I do want to draw attention to two countries in particular, Finland, where we see relatively less extreme worry, and the Philippines, where we see a great deal of extreme worry. And if we look at those two countries in particular on this graph, which has a whole lot of emotions listed, we can see in the Philippines sort of 64% feeling hopeless, versus 54% in Finland. Above that, 91% sad versus 54%. About 90% afraid versus 54%. 70% angry versus 49%. And that's just drawing attention to some of those emotions and getting us to think about sort of what's different between those two countries, though not detracting from the fact that the numbers are high overall. And just one other table, this is thoughts or images and responses in the future. So humanity is doomed at 73% in the Philippines, 43% in Finland. The future is frightening, 92% in the Philippines versus 56% in Finland, and my family's security will be threatened, 77% in the Philippines versus about 30% in Finland. And, to give some context to this, I'm sure you've all come up with pretty plausible theories already about the differences between these two countries. One feature is there's something called the Disaster Risk Index, which is a world report. And according to the 2021 World Risk Index, which included 181 countries, Finland was number 171, so a very low risk, whereas we can see here that the Philippines is number 8, so of very high risk. Vanuatu tops the list. And this risk is a combination of the likelihood of these disastrous events, storms and volcanoes and earthquakes and all sorts of other natural disasters, but also of the infrastructure and support mechanisms within the country in order to respond to those events of primarily wealth, as well as a particularly natural configuration of the country. And the Philippines is quite vulnerable in both those regards. So, it's vulnerable to sea level rise, extreme weather, rising temperatures, rainfall, a number of natural hazards are likely, and it's dependent on climate sensitive resources with a lot of coastline along which people live. So you can see that for young people in the Philippines, the future already has, these events already have occurred, and it's really sort of clear their vulnerability and that their family security might be threatened. Now, this one actually is not so much featured on, doesn't show those differences in the two countries, but this is the sense to which people feel a sense of betrayal by their governments versus a sense of reassurance, with the salmon bars being betrayal and being higher in all countries. Brazil here seems to have a somewhat worse profile in this regard than any other country. And the last of these figures I want to show you is the correlation between negative thoughts about the environment, and feeling betrayed by their government. About climate change and feeling betrayed by their government. And this is a pretty high correlation at 0.47. And what it indicates, without being able to say causal direction, is that betrayal, that sense that you are not being looked after, and the stress are pretty highly related. We'll get back to that. So, as I said, a lot of some of this distress is based on real world events. It's particular to certain places, but a lot of it is also generated by the narratives that we find in the media and public conversation. So just to give you a quick snippet here, this is an article about giant plumes of Saharan dust that choked a whole swath of the southern United States as being a generational event, which deepening climate change induced droughts and all sorts of other hyperbolic language to describe what is happening, designed really to generate the sense of apocalypse, accompanied by rather apocalyptic looking pictures such as this. So this kind of language is not uncommon. And there are accompanying this many headlines wherever you look saying that politicians are useless, so don't rely on them to fix climate change, whether they're the UN or local politicians, such as those responsible for Auckland's climate systems. So all of this is what I've called an apocalyptic double play, an insistence that the planet is going to rack and ruin, politicians are useless, and it's exacerbated by a particular twist in these liberal, individualist, sort of democratic societies in which people are supposed to take charge of their own well-being, is that you need to do something about it. So it's not okay to not be sort of deeply distressed. That's the kind of clock, I think, that is going on at some cost to our well-being. So it's a perfect storm for climate anxiety, high levels of worry, low sense of trust in others, or feeling that they can be heard. One of the elements of that betrayal item that I talked about before by government was whether the government listened to the concerns of young people, and a sense that this is somehow your problem. Without the sense that you could or should do something about it, it's really more like fatalism than it is like anxiety. So how do we navigate this? Well, this is my finish, and I've got 3 suggestions. The first is perhaps a bit of fatalism at one level, not quite, but to accept that anxiety comes with the territory. We can't, and in a sense we shouldn't, limit that human beings who care and who live in the social context we're in, some of them at least are going to feel some anxiety. It's a pretty normal response to the conditions we're facing. And what's more, some level of anxiety leads to support for climate policies, primes us for action. And remember how I talked about negative emotions, focusing attention on the issue, which floods our minds. If you're anxious about climate change and it's flooding your mind, your attention has been drawn. And to some extent, that is a good thing. The other one I think I'm really interested in is this idea of trying not to project your fear onto others. Fear, I think, has limited value. I'm also not really sure about anger, although it's probably just me not enjoying it very much in myself or others. But fear, that withdrawal, it's pretty difficult to see a strong place for. And I want to read you a little bit from an essay written by Tony Kushner that is called Despair is a Lie We Tell Ourselves, and it's in a book called The Impossible Will Take a Little While. And Kushner starts this little essay by writing, a Chicago cab driver recently told me, if there's a supernova 60 light years away from here, the world will be totally wiped out. We don't stand a chance. He gave me something to think about, namely the fact that life, each individual life, and our collective life on the planet is not infinite. It has an ending, so the future you've put your faith in is not, in fact, limitless. Given the catastrophic failure to seriously address global warming, given the sagging of the world's economy and the refusal to see any solutions beyond making poor people suffer even more than they always do, in the hopes of reviving a market that only ever revives long enough to make the rich even richer, well, it's sort of optimistic to believe it's a supernova that's going to get us. It's clear that what's much more likely to get us, if we're got, is our present way of living in the world. And he goes on, Since I was a little kid, I've been told I have choices, the right to make a choice. Although I've never been dumb enough to believe this was literally true, I've also never been dumb enough to be literal. And I've always believed I could choose to believe or not believe that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And he goes on to talk about some of the actions we could take. He ends the essay like this. So when the supernova comes to get us, we don't want to be disappointed in ourselves. We should hope to be able to say proudly to the supernova, that angel of death, "Hello, supernova, we have been expecting you. We know all about you. So we've been expecting you, everyone, everywhere. And we would like to say, supernova, in the moment before we are returned by your protean fire to our previous state, clouds of incandescent atomic vapor, we'd like to declare that we have tried our best and worked hard to make a good and just and free and peaceful world, a world that is better for us having been here, at least we believe it." So you can take a lesson from that, I think. Is despair an obligation, or is it, as Krishna suggests, a choice or even a lie we tell ourselves? I think it's very important for adults, especially with young children, to think about what they want to project, and a lot of that is about how you hold your own emotions. So the third one I want to talk about just for a couple of minutes is to be intentional. One of the things about social change, or one of the things about disputing and working, if you like, against the status quo, is that it's more difficult than you can describe, because it's not just a practical difficulty of getting things in place. It's that the status quo draws us in like a black hole. The status quo is belonging, it's status, it's comfort, it's often our families. It's super hard to resist doing what everyone is doing. And it carries this emotional cost. It carries often a sense of disloyalty, a sense of disorientation, missing out on the brownie points, the need for multiple reality checks with like-minded others, and so on. So how do you be intentional? Or just segueing off what I just said about like-minded others, I want to advocate that you think about sustainability networks as a solution for that. And at the organisational level, I've actually been involved in helping set up 3 such networks. And they're networks in which the intention is around creating a sustainability culture that is oriented towards a flourishing planet and thriving people. So that's a sort of really broad mission. And then you work together to do projects that are trying to support that. And you cry on each other's shoulders and report your occasional wins as well. The one I've been involved in was at Western Springs College in Harré, where for 11 years I was actively involved in a network that's still going on there as a researcher and a parent, along with school students, school staff, and external supporters like the Auckland Council. And we did a number of projects around waste management, but art projects, introducing subjects, stream cleanups, fashion shows using trash. Many projects were generated by that. The second example is a network here at the University of Auckland in the Faculty of Science, which was focused around sustainability. We got a working group. They were all volunteers, but as it happened, from all the schools in the faculty. We did recycling, we did composting, and we had a sustainable labs project where the labs in the different schools would do audits of their processes. And we also had seminar series and many things besides. And finally, just to finish, we are doing something at Starship Children's Hospital with James, Mercedes, Stephanie, me, and just most recently, Alicia, where we hope to set up a similar network with that broad sort of mission of moving towards a culture of sustainability and generating and supporting each other on projects as we go. So be intentional and do it with others. Thank you for listening.